Dungeons & Dragons has hundreds of epic creatures and monsters for your party to fight against, and even alongside, and there are so many iconic creatures that everyone has their own favourites, including me. Now just for a quick disclaimer, I don't claim to be speaking unquestionable truths here. This is just my opinion. Also, I've not actually used all of the creatures in the monster manual and the monsters of the multiverse books in campaigns themselves, so if I use them my opinions might change a little bit. And because I've only got those two books, those are the creatures that I'm going to be going over for this video. So if your favourite isn't in, and it's from one of the extended rulebooks, that may be why. With all that being said, let's jump into my favourite creatures at each challenge rating. I didn't expect CR0 to be such a challenge, but it was a toss-up between cranium rats and the myconid sprouts. Something about the telepathic powers of these small creatures is just really fascinating to me, and really lends itself to be put into creative uses in your campaign. For me, the myconid sprout just about edges it out. The way it can be used to spread rapport spores for the myconid colony, like a little mini mobile fungus farmer, is really interesting and can lead to some interesting world building. Like a rogue sovereign that's trying to use the myconid sprouts to infest the overworld and spread their colony far and wide, creating a sort of telepathic network. So without a doubt, my favourite creature at 1/8 of a challenge rating is the Svarts. For no other reason than they're just funny little guys with bald heads that are super greedy and only really exist to draw attention from their creator. Kinda like a weird little bald camouflage blanket with the face that only a mother, or deranged demigod father, could love. I think you'll probably notice a little bit of a theme here. I just love little mushroom guys. So for challenge rating 1/4, I'm going to go with the Vegapygmy. The whole idea of these little fungus creatures clawing forth from a russet mold killed creature, taking on some of its features, is so creepy and cool. Double with the fact that they spread their spores on creatures that they kill to spawn more and more Vegapygmies is so brutal. And their carnivorous nature leads to some really interesting dungeon ideas centred around them trying to find the party to spread their spores. A really close runner-up for this was the Troglodyte, because I just absolutely love using them as an insult, and their really interesting design. I just wish that their challenge rating was a little bit higher so that they didn't end up just being fodder for bigger encounters. So for 1/2 of a challenge rating, I had to go for the Cockatrice. The ability to just petrify a character at any level is downright terrifying. They're horrifying, they can fly, and they can turn people to stone. What more do you want from a creature? For me, their design is just so unbelievably cool, and I wish I used them more in the world just in general as mounts and things like that than I have done so far. A funky little guy that kinda stole my heart, albeit before I actually realised what they were, is the Nilbog. These little dudes and dudettes on the surface are just wisecracking funky little goblins that go around being the pure embodiment of chaos. But underneath, they're actually poor goblins who have been possessed by a spirit formed by the trickster god, who goes around possessing them, wreaking havoc until the goblins are eventually killed before moving on to its next victim. I just feel so bad for the goblins. I imagine that there'd still be a passenger in their own body who's been taken over by a Nilbog and just cannot control what their body's doing. It was another super close call for CR2, but I had to go with the Ogre Howder. Something about an ogre walking around with a moving fortress on its back just screams fantasy, and I could definitely see it leading to some really interesting combat encounters and super intense moments. It also lends itself to some really interesting world building questions, like how did such a powerful creature end up becoming subservient to another group? The close second for this challenge rating was the Rutterkin, which in Monsters of the Multiverse specifically says they roam in mobs to devour everything in their path. And I can tell you that seeing a mob of these would make me run for the hills in a heartbeat. It took absolutely everything in my power to not choose the GIF, or GIF, for this one. They're just big hippo guys and gals and I love them to pieces. But if I'm being honest, the only choice for me has to be the doppelganger. One of the best ways that you can get into your heads as a DM is to just drop a couple of hints here and there like a little salt bay, hinting at a doppelganger's present, even if there isn't really one. Yet. Having a lovable NPC later turn up to be a doppelganger can be a really huge source of motivation for the party. It's a great way to get the party hooked onto a quest, and they can also call into question when the real character actually was replaced with the doppelganger. For me personally, the only choice for challenge rating 4 has to be the Banshee. The combination of the real-world folklore of the Banshee, the terrifying appearance, the horror setting and its wail ability all lend itself to some really intense moments. A Banshee actually kickstarted a really interesting character arc in one of my campaigns currently. A player encouraged one of his NPC love interests to come over on the adventure when the Banshee immediately killed them with its whale ability. 10 out of 10 would recommend if you want to traumatise your player characters. This challenge rating 5 creature is one that I haven't actually used in any of my campaigns yet, but definitely plan to after researching about it for this video. The adult Oblex, having devoured enough creatures' memories and appearances that it can mimic the sound and sight of the person, is just insane. It mimics creatures to draw more prey inside, like the ice cream truck out of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, except a lot more Lovecraftian and grotesque. Imagine a cult leader that's actually just an adult Oblex that's demanding sacrifices of flesh and memories to its form. Absolutely spine-chilling. Even though we no longer have the funny lightning death dance anymore, the Vrock holds a special place in my heart. In my first ever one-shot as a DM, the Vrock was the main villain, and the combination of resistances, the flight, its appearance, and the poisonous spores it spread were really interesting. My one and only regret is that I never got to do the funny 4 Vrock 20d6 lightning damage death dance, and I'll take that to my grave. But all in all, the Vrock is a really creepy demon bat crow chicken creature, and provides a really interesting challenge for low to mid-level players to fight. I think most people would agree with me that the Mind Flayer is their favourite challenge rating 7 monster. Not only because it's one of the most iconic creatures in D&D, having so much power that it's even permeated into pop culture with Stranger Things, but Illithids are also really well fleshed out from a lore perspective as well, and provide a perfect mastermind for a villainous act in your campaign. And they often work away from the Underdark in the shadows, furthering their colony and trying to harvest even more sentient creatures. One of the things I find most interesting about the Illithids is their collective consciousness, but also their subservience to the Elder Brain. It's like these opposing forces of insane individual power, but then also being a small cog in a greater machine. Runners up for this absolute beast of a challenge rating are the Lost Sorrowsworn, for when you want to feel your Dead Space fantasy. And then also the Venom Troll, just because they remind me so much of Boomers from Left 4 Dead, or the Bloaters from The Last of Us. Another iconic fantasy creature that makes its way onto this list is the Hydra. The Hydra can be a really menacing presence on an underwater battlefield, with numerous opportunity attacks forcing players to make really hard decisions between staying and fighting and retreating and risking all of that damage. And that's especially true when you combine it with the fact that it regenerates health and gains even more attacks of opportunity if you do damage it. In a setting where you're nearby to water, put out a couple of rumours of a powerful creature that's blocking access to a shortcut or a point of interest. When your players inevitably go to check it out, they'll be super caught off guard when a number of heads rear from the water, rather than just one. Challenge rating 9 was another close one, but since I've already got an Illithid on the list, I'm going to have to go with the Treant. They're just big old plant stoners, and they just love forests and trees and plants and wildlife, and I really vibe with that. It also calls back to Treebeard from Lord of the Rings, and I just love the idea of a Treant being dormant for hundreds of years before being brought back to wrath by someone intruding in the forest. There's other ways of running Treants too. I've thought about perhaps having one that's a collective conscience, or one that's maybe a little bit misguided and is instead trying to spread forests across the world and destroying cities and towns in its path, sort of like a Team Magma or Aqua from Pokemon Emerald. For challenge rating 10 we have another absolutely horrifying creature, the Death Slard. The Slardy themselves are absolutely terrifying, implanting eggs into humanoid hosts, which then promptly burst from their chest alien style. But then on top of that, if a grey Slard cannibalises a Death Slard, it immediately turns into one itself. While Death Slards are technically only a medium-sized creature, they have a huge AC and HP pool, massive damage on their greatsword attacks, and can cast spells innately, on top of being able to regenerate hit points at the start of each round. Needless to say, the Death Slard really lives up to its name, and any party going against one is in for a wild ride. There's a lot of really cool creatures at challenge rating 11, but the one I eventually chose as my favourite was the Rock. Its size alone, at over 60 metres, make it an absolute menace to behold. That's like the Colossal Titan sideways for reference. It has a whopping 28 strength, 250 HP, and if it uses its dash action, can travel at 120 feet per round, which actually is only around 30 miles per hour, which is kind of cringe. But anyway, you can't tell me that a gargantuan bird that hunts whales isn't impressive. And as a bit of a side note, don't you think the Yagnoloth also looks like a bit of a naked Thanos? For challenge rating 12, I've picked a creature that tugs on my heartstrings a little bit. In spite of its intimidating looks, the Grey Render is actually just a big old softie that just wants to find an intelligent creature to snuggle up alongside, fight with, and eventually lay down its life for. They actually breed by growing individual little nodules across their body, which eventually fall off before sprouting into their own Grey Renders that go off to find their own intelligent creatures. They're honestly so adorable, and the Monsters of the Multiverse book actually lays out a load of quirks that you can roll for, such as the fact that they love to snuggle, whine at the dark, or have eye-watering farts. Strahd. Yeah, really the only choice here beyond a multitude of dragons is the vampire. But to give them credit where it's due, they're incredible catalysts for stories, great to battle against and roleplay with. And one is the primary antagonist of arguably the greatest module in D&D 5th edition. Plus, what DM doesn't want the chance to say, "I want to suck your blood"? Oh, that was cringe. This video ended up actually taking a lot longer than I expected to film, so I'm going to be splitting it up into 2 parts. If you enjoyed this one and want to see the rest of the monsters for different challenge ratings, then make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and press that bell button so you know when the next part comes out. It won't be too long. Hope to see you next time.